In this episode, we shift from risk context in the abstract into operational risk context, which is the version of context that matters when the system is live, relied upon, and capable of causing real mission harm if it fails at the wrong time. New learners often think that once a system reaches production, risk management becomes mostly about watching for attackers and applying patches, but operational risk context is broader and more grounded than that. It is about understanding the system as it actually behaves in production, including the real users, the real data flows, the real dependencies, and the real consequences when something goes wrong. Establishing operational risk context means defining what success looks like for mission outcomes, what kinds of failure or compromise matter most, and what constraints shape response and recovery. It also means acknowledging that production systems are rarely perfect reflections of the original design, because they accumulate exceptions, workarounds, and integrations over time. When you get operational risk context right, you stop talking about security controls as isolated features and start talking about how the system's living behavior creates or reduces risk. That perspective is essential for making decisions that protect mission outcomes rather than just satisfying documentation requirements. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Operational risk context begins with recognizing that production is not just a deployment state. It is an environment with responsibilities and consequences. In production, availability is not a nice-to-have. It is often a mission promise to users, customers, patients, or staff who depend on the service. Integrity is not a theoretical property. It is the reliability of the data and outputs that drive decisions, workflows, and sometimes safety. Confidentiality is not a policy phrase. It is the protection of real personal or sensitive information that, if exposed, can trigger legal, reputational, and operational damage. Establishing context means identifying which of these properties matter most for this specific system and under what circumstances, because not every system has the same mission criticality or data sensitivity. It also means describing what counts as meaningful disruption, such as partial outages, degraded performance, or loss of a single function that blocks a whole workflow. Beginners should learn that operational risk is measured against mission outcomes, not against an idealized security model. When you focus on mission outcomes, you are more likely to prioritize the risks that truly threaten the organization's purpose. A core part of operational context is defining the system boundary as it exists in production, which often differs from the boundary people imagined during design. Production boundaries include the services that are truly connected, the data sources that are truly feeding the system, and the identity systems that actually govern access. Over time, production systems tend to grow tendrils, such as unofficial data exports, ad hoc integrations, or temporary connections that become permanent because they solve a problem. If you do not capture these real boundaries, your risk context becomes inaccurate, and monitoring and response plans will miss important pathways. Operational context, therefore, requires a realistic map of dependencies and interfaces, including third-party services, shared infrastructure, and downstream systems that rely on outputs. It also requires clarity about what is out of scope and who owns those out-of-scope parts, because production risk is often born in gaps between teams. For beginners, it helps to understand that risk does not respect organizational charts. So context must bridge across ownership boundaries even when responsibility is divided. Mission outcomes are the anchor for operational risk context, and they must be described in a way that is specific enough to guide choices under pressure. A mission outcome might be timely delivery of a service, accurate processing of records, reliable communication during emergencies, or consistent access to critical resources. The system contributes to those outcomes through functions that may have different criticality, such as a core transaction path versus an optional reporting feature. Operational context should therefore describe which functions are essential and what happens when they degrade, because not all outages are equal. Some failures are acceptable for a short time without major harm, and others cause cascading consequences within minutes. Beginners should learn to avoid the trap of treating all availability issues as equivalent. because that leads either to over-engineering or to underprotection. Instead, you link risk decisions to what the mission truly needs, such as keeping the core workflow available even if non-essential features are temporarily disabled. This clarity also supports recovery planning because it tells responders what to restore first. Operational context must also capture the system's normal operating pattern, because risk is partly a function of what normal looks like. Normal includes expected traffic patterns, expected user behavior, expected administrative activity, and expected change cadence. For example, a system that experiences predictable peaks has different capacity and availability risks than one with unpredictable spikes. A system with frequent configuration changes has different drift and misconfiguration risks than one that is stable for long periods. A system with many administrative users has different access governance risks than one with tightly controlled administrative roles. When you know what normal looks like, you can detect abnormal behavior more reliably and avoid being overwhelmed by noise. It also helps you understand which operational assumptions are realistic, such as whether patching within a short window is feasible given uptime requirements. Beginners should see that operational context is like the baseline for both monitoring and decision-making, because you cannot judge risk changes without knowing what steady-state reality is. Constraints are another essential part of operational risk context, because constraints shape both prevention and response. Production systems often have constraints like limited maintenance windows, strict uptime expectations, performance requirements, and staffing limitations for after-hours support. They also have dependencies on vendor support response times and on other teams' availability, which can stretch recovery time even when technical fixes exist. Operational context should make these constraints explicit rather than assuming ideal conditions, because risk posture depends on the ability to act. For example, a control that requires frequent manual review may not be sustainable if staffing is limited, and unsustainable controls degrade over time and create hidden risk. A recovery plan that assumes immediate specialist availability may fail in real events, increasing impact. When constraints are explicit, leaders can decide whether to invest to relax constraints, such as funding additional coverage, or to accept certain risks with eyes open. This is how operational context turns into defendable governance rather than optimistic planning. A mature operational context also includes how the system fails, not just how it works, because failure modes define the real risk surface. Some systems fail loudly, with obvious outages, while others fail silently, such as dropping logs, corrupting data slowly, or allowing unauthorized actions without obvious alarms. Silent failure is often more dangerous in security because it allows harm to continue longer without detection. Operational context should describe what kinds of failures are plausible, which failures are most harmful, and what signals exist when those failures occur. This does not require deep technical detail, but it does require thinking about dependencies, such as what happens when identity services are unavailable or when a logging pipeline breaks. Beginners should learn to ask, how would we know something is wrong? And what would we see first? Because those questions connect context to detection and response performance. When failure modes are considered, monitoring becomes more purposeful because it is aligned to the actual ways harm could unfold. Another key part of operational risk context is defining decision criteria for production systems, because production decisions often involve immediate trade-offs. For example, during an incident, a team may choose to disable a feature to contain harm, which reduces confidentiality or integrity risk but increases availability impact for certain users. During a patch cycle, a team may choose to delay an update to avoid downtime, which reduces availability risk in the short term but increases exposure to exploitation. Operational context defines what trade-offs are acceptable and what trade-offs are not, based on mission priorities and risk appetite. It also defines escalation thresholds, such as what events require leadership notification, what requires incident declaration, and what requires formal risk acceptance. This is where alignment with enterprise risk management matters, because production systems often sit at the center of mission delivery and therefore attract oversight. For beginners, it is important to see that criteria are not just for planning. They are for making consistent choices under stress. Criteria prevent every event from becoming an improvised debate. Operational context should also clarify roles and responsibilities in a way that reflects how work actually happens, because in production, response speed depends on clarity. It matters who monitors, who approves changes, who can take emergency action, and who communicates with leadership and affected stakeholders. It also matters how responsibilities cross team boundaries, such as when operations controls infrastructure while security controls detection and incident coordination. If these responsibilities are unclear, response slows, and slowed response increases impact, especially when time to detect and time to repair are key risk drivers. Beginners should understand that operational risk is influenced by organizational design and communication pathways, not only by technical controls. A team can have strong tools and still fail to manage risk if ownership and escalation paths are confused. Establishing context means documenting how responsibilities are assigned and ensuring those assignments match reality rather than ideal organizational charts. When responsibilities are clear, monitoring and response become predictable, and predictability reduces risk. Finally, establishing operational risk context requires connecting the system's production reality to the metrics and signals that will indicate whether risk posture is stable or drifting. That includes signals of control health, like whether logging coverage remains complete, whether access remains least privilege, and whether patching remains timely. It also includes signals of mission health, like whether performance and uptime remain within acceptable bounds, and whether critical workflows are completing. When these signals are defined, you can track residual, changed, and new risks more effectively because you have a baseline and a set of leading indicators. This makes operational risk management more proactive because you are not waiting for a major incident to learn that the system has drifted. For beginners, it helps to see that operational context is a practical tool for daily management, not a one-time document created for auditors. When context is tied to observable signals and decision criteria, it becomes the foundation for calm, consistent governance. The main takeaway is that operational risk context is the bridge between a system's technical design and the mission outcomes the system exists to support. It defines the production boundary as it truly exists, identifies what success and harm look like for mission workflows, and makes constraints, failure modes, decision criteria, and responsibilities explicit. This context keeps risk management grounded in reality because it accounts for how systems evolve, how people actually use them, and how organizations actually respond when something goes wrong. When operational context is clear, leaders can make better trade-offs, teams can respond faster, and monitoring can focus on signals that matter rather than on noise. Over time, this reduces both dramatic surprises and slow drift into unacceptable exposure, because the organization always has a shared understanding of what is being protected and why. Establishing that shared understanding for production systems is one of the most important steps you can take to ensure risk management stays aligned with mission outcomes, even as system reality shifts.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.